Since the out of Africa theory was proposed and proven over and over again, people have been trying to dismiss it as a reality. And the reason for this is simply because they want to take away the one thing that unites people outside of Africa to Africa. The following videos, you will see a pattern that will emerge with two different ideas emerging but coming to the same concept at the end. So, firstly, they will say, if they agree that human beings evolved from Africa, they will say that that's because Africans are primitive. We evolved from them, that means they're primitive. But the ones that believe or want to believe that they evolved in Europe will say that the Africans are primitive because we didn't evolve from them. This means that no matter what happens, even if we were to find that human beings came from the ocean or something, no matter what happens, their answer of the people who are racist is therefore black people are more primitive than these people. Now, given this, I still want to react to these videos because, of course, these people have tens of thousands of views and somebody needs to push back against this garbage. Starting with everybody's favorite grandfather.
Hello again. When the average person in Europe or America talks of black Africans, they tend to visualize a person typical of those found in Nigeria and other parts of West Africa, with very dark skin and distinctive facial features. The reason for this is that although 10,000 years ago most of Africa was inhabited by lighter skinned people with epicanthic eye folds.
So, to understand what he's talking about here, he's basically talking about the Bantu people moving into Khoisan territory, and he's using this as an excuse to say that everybody living in southern Africa look like Khoisan people. But this does not match up with the evidence, as the Twa people, who are neither Bantu nor Khoisan, lived in the southern African regions close to Khoisan people, and they do not have epicanthic eye folds, and they are definitely, as you can see in the picture, not light in skin. Now, the Twa are only one people. There are several other people, including populations that completely vanished, but we still have DNA evidence for, who lived in the regions that today would be called Southern Africa, from Congo all the way down to South Africa. So he is completely incorrect about this, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. Uh, the rest of Africa had black people everywhere, so I don't know what he's talking about.
The ancestors of the Khoisan, together with the Pygmies of Central Africa.
Over here, he's trying to allege that the pygmies themselves are light skinned, but if you look at this picture, you can tell that these people, by the way, these people are all adults. These people, you can tell, are not light skinned.
Those from West Africa invaded and colonized the rest of the continent roughly 4,000 years ago.
I love, of course, how now colonization is this terrible thing when it involves Africans, but they did not just run around colonizing every place. Yes, there was pushing of people, but a lot of it was cultural fusion, and a lot of the DNA of Khoisan people is still inside of the Bantu people. So it's easy to say they just colonized everybody, and sure enough, of course, some Bantu people, when they traveled, surely colonized people, and there always has been colonization in Africa. But that, I don't know what that has to do with anything.
As they did so, they spread their genes across Africa by mating with those whom they encountered, as well as massacring them.
I love how he accidentally told the truth and then had to change it. He was like, "Oh, they went everywhere and mated with the people." Oh, wait, massacring. Because of course, mating is a good thing, and you can't let Africans look like they just did something good, at least for a moment. This is obviously very weak.
And what genes these were! Tens of thousands of years after the emergence of modern humans, who had spread into Europe and Asia, mating with Neanderthals and Denisovans whom they found there.
So, as you can see here, he actually believes that human beings did leave Africa, that they're out of Africa. But I want to play this video first because you will see that human beings coming out of Africa does not change for this person whether or not it's a good thing or not for Africans.
Those who remained in Africa were mating with another human species, one which was, unlike the Neanderthals, exceedingly primitive and backwards.
So here we have him just blatantly lying again. The people, the Neanderthals and the other human beings or type of humans that existed in Africa had just about the same level of intelligence because their stone tools and their other tools didn't change for thousands of years. The reason why Homo sapiens, the ones we are, have survived way past all of those people is because our tools have changed dramatically to this day. I mean, just look what we have. You can't argue that we have things that those people had back then. But even back then, human beings had things that were already better than stone tools, that were already better than those built by either Neanderthals or any other population of human. Now, obviously, there are some human beings that we have no idea existed and we have no idea what their tools were, but of the ones that we know, nothing beats human beings.
In 1965, an ancient skull was found in Nigeria, which was a puzzling combination of modern human features and more primitive traits. The Iwo Elaru skull seemed to look like a cross between modern human skull and a very early type of hominid called Homo erectus.
First of all, the Iwo Elaru skull does not show anything of such kind. Most people think that it's a human, a normal human, but there is some speculation that it is fused with some other type of human being from the past. Now, the skull, first of all, that seems like it was fused with some other human being is not primitive or anything like that. In fact, speculation of usage of certain things that would come up later in Africa makes it seem like it's actually one of the pushes forward as we see palm oil being used in that area, possibly.
This species lasted for a couple of million years without making any progress at all,
Again, just making stuff up. Throw out a couple million years. The species. What species? What are you talking about?
using the same tools for the whole of that time without developing them further. In sharp contrast, of course, to the Neanderthals and modern humans, who were always coming up with new ideas.
Again, not making any sense. Even the Khoisan people and the black Africans have completely different culture. If these two people came from these people, I assume he's still talking about the Iwo Elaru skull. Otherwise, I have no idea what he's talking about. These people don't even have the same culture, so clearly they're coming up with completely different ideas from one another. And of course, like I said, they developed things like palm oil, different uses of different things, and also paints have been found in those regions. So we know that they did not just do nothing the whole time and not come up with new ideas.
We know that in the rest of the world outside Africa, all humans now have between 1 and 4% of their DNA from either Neanderthals or Denisovans or a combination of the two, and that some of the genes that we have inherited from the Neanderthals are very useful, relating to things such as brain function.
There's three things that's funny about the statement. The first one is the fact that I used to read on the internet a long time ago where people would write racist remarks trying to change prehistory, and they would say that human beings in Africa are more related to Neanderthals. That's why they have less brain power or whatever, which is hilarious because now that Neanderthals are on the other side, they are somehow the reason for genius or something. And then, of course, lastly, he's wrong about the idea that no Africans have Neanderthal DNA. Of course, Africans have Neanderthal DNA today, and so, does he then mean that those people are geniuses too? Okay, so finally, are Neanderthals super smart? The answer is no. We have found no evidence of that whatsoever. They seem actually to be very, very backwards compared to modern human beings. And of course, we outwit them or something. Something about us made us continue living and not them. And even black Africans who don't have a touch of Neanderthal DNA are still alive.
Other genes are not so useful to do with things like addiction and allergies. In Africa, the case is quite different. Africans, black Africans, have inherited between 2 and 19% of their DNA from earlier and more primitive humans, most likely Homo erectus, although we can't be sure because we don't have a complete genome of Homo erectus.
Like everything else that he says, he just picks a name out of a hat, Homo erectus, which, by the way, every single human has about 0.2% of this DNA. Some people might have a little more, but it's not even significant. It doesn't even matter. But to him, it's like, oh, Africans have 90% Homo erectus. Therefore, it's like, why are you just making stuff up?
We know all this partly through genetics and partly through such things as the Iwa-Elleru skull.
First of all, no one knows that information except for you because you made it up. And partly through the Ellery skull. The only Ellery skull, never mind. The thing about this whole thing is that he just takes some names that he probably Googled and then he just looks at them for like 5 seconds and creates this, I don't know, this, I'll just say this work in order not to insult him.
This means that black Africans are different from all other humans in the rest of the world.
Everyone in the world is different than everybody else in the world. Asians are different than Europeans. Africans are different than Europeans. Europeans are different than other Europeans. Depends what you mean by different, but if you mean they're different completely and they're not part of the Homo sapien race, then you are being extremely dumb, and I'm not surprised.
Genetically different, that is. What the effect of this differing genetic heritage is, we do not yet know.
What the result of this DNA is, we do not know, but I don't know why, since you've been making up information this entire time, why don't you just continue? I mean, you're already down that road.
The black people in Britain and America came chiefly from that same part of West Africa where the Iwa-Elleru skull was found.
It must be fun just to sit around and make information up. This guy, at this point, is claiming that every single person who is black outside of Africa comes from this one specific region. And of course, he can't prove that because, of course, there's a lot of Sudanese, Ethiopian, and all kinds of people who live outside of just West Africa.
All the Caribbeans in Britain and the descendants of slaves in the United States are from that part of Africa, the part around the West African coast.
Incorrect. Africans tend to be closely related to each other compared to other people from outside of Africa. And of course, Ethiopians, Southern Africans, Bantu people, and all of these other people are not all from the West African area. But if we're talking specifically about people outside of Africa, a lot of the people who went to the Americas were already mixed with several other African types, which is, if you've ever done a DNA test and you're African American, you will see that show up in your results where they will start to show other parts of Africa and they won't just say one specific region and that's it.
To sum up, the white people in Britain and America have a few percent of Neanderthal DNA, which has had a profound effect on them.
I'll keep saying it over and over again until people fully understand it. If it was found that black people had Neanderthal DNA, it would have been taken as a negative thing They would have said that for some reason this Neanderthal DNA is inferior, as he is doing with the other ghost species in Africa.
But the black people in those countries have a percentage of DNA from an archaic species. This is a fundamental difference between black people and white.
Nope, wrong again. Doesn't know what he's talking about. Human beings have the same level of just about anything, with the exception of having some ghost species inside of them and Neanderthal DNA, but these Neanderthals and ghost species tend to be the same level of technology.
It may be a trivial and unimportant difference. On the other hand, it might perhaps have more significance than we know yet. We don't know any of this for sure, but that this is how things are genetically is completely beyond dispute.
Well, I dispute it, and everybody else disputes it because you just made it up. And 90% of the stuff that this guy talks about, he makes up anyway. Which, by the way, there are thousands of people who take this person very, very seriously. You're probably watching it like, why am I watching it? Go to his channel and go check. There's thousands of people who take him seriously.
Pertaining to human biological diversity, DNA, racial origins, and evolutionary theory. And while various hypotheses pertaining to humanity's origins are discussed at the university level, the out of Africa theory is heavily favored, despite compounding evidence to the contrary.
Now, here's the interesting part. This next person is going to say something completely opposite to what the other guy is saying, claiming that human beings or the out of Africa theory is not correct, but somehow is going to come to the same conclusion that therefore Africans are less intelligent. But, we have to get to that part of the video. In fact, we don't have to. His entire channel is kind of based around that. And of course, there are some Europeans which I assume suffer from low self esteem, and they have to sort of pick on whatever group they have to. And you notice this. There's two groups that a lot of people pick on when they try to up themselves. And the first one is minorities in general in America, and the second is females. What he is basically crying about in this video is the idea that the scientists are not going to side with him on just throwing away their concepts in one moment just because he is upset at black people. Now, here's the funny part. This video should just be ignored and thrown to the side, and I believe that that's what I should do too. But the problem is he's got tens of thousands of views, and also that it's part of this growing function of people copying him, as others you will see will.
Because it seems to support a social engineering political agenda rather than a scientific one.
What political agenda? The people who support the out of Africa theory first were some of the most racist people in the world. It's what political agenda are you talking about? These people can still believe in out of Africa and believe that therefore black people are inferior. This has nothing to do with a political agenda.
Another theory which is touched upon is called the aquatic ape, which I covered in a prior video, that postulates that mankind did not necessarily come about from monkeys and great apes, but may have shared a common ancestor that evolved around water, whether on the surface of the earth by lakes, rivers, and oceans, or in subterranean caverns, which also contain similar bodies of water, with some upright walking hominins later taking to the trees to evolve into branch climbing monkeys or fur covered apes.
So you believe in something that doesn't make sense? Okay, that makes sense.
And while this may sound counterintuitive, mainly because of decades of media conditioning, the concept does share some parallels among some of the world's foremost geneticists and evolutionary biologists, who may or may not also have received a coupon at Red Lobster.
Get to the point. Get to the point.
Dr. Owen Lovejoy is a distinguished evolutionary anthropologist at Kent State University, Ohio, best known for his work on Australopithecine, locomotion, and the origins of bipedalism. Lovejoy has published more than 100 articles related to his research, and is most well known for his work on reconstructing Lucy, an alleged human ancestor with an opposable big toe on its feet, meaning they resembled thumbs for grasping branches and climbing trees. While Lovejoy claimed that Lucy, which was dated to 3.4 million years ago, was at least partially bipedal, he proposes that Artie, another alleged human ancestor dated to between 4 and 5 million years ago, spent more of its time allegedly walking than Lucy, despite being over a million years older. This article titled, "Man Did Not Evolve from Apes," says, a U.S. biological anthropologist says he's determined humans did not evolve from apes, but...
Wait, what is he debunking? Humans evolved from apes? Who ever said that humans evolved from apes? Human beings did not evolve from apes. human beings have a sister or a ancestral tie with apes back in the day, but they did not evolve from apes. This is a weird, I don't know, turn to try and make it seem like this person is saying something else.
Rather, apes evolved from humans.
Apes evolved from humans? Apes evolved from humans. Apes evolved. Okay. Please don't get angry at me. I'm cutting the video off right here. I'm not watching any more of this. This is, at this point, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to sit here and argue with someone who believes that apes evolved from human beings. Next video, please.
For decades, we've been taught a simple story about our origins.
Well, it's not exactly that simple. It's easier to call it simple if you understand only the top layer parts. If you don't understand the deep parts of it, like the archaeology, the genetics, and everything else, then of course you're going to call it simple. It's not a story. It's a study and a theory and a working theory at that.
Humanity emerged from a single African cradle and spread across the globe. But what if this long-held belief is just a piece of a much larger puzzle?
What you just said doesn't make sense. If the belief is incorrect, how can it be part of a much bigger puzzle? That would mean it's correct.
Discoveries are challenging the very foundations of our understanding of human evolution, from ancient fossils to cutting-edge genetics. Evidence is mounting that suggests a more complex and intriguing narrative. So, what's really going on? What's this new evidence revealing? And could the Out of Africa theory really be debunked? Stick around, because you won't want to miss this.
Well, Mr. AI voice with AI-generated videos, I don't know if I do have the patience to stick around after hearing what I heard earlier.
For over a century, Charles Darwin's Out of Africa theory has been the cornerstone of our understanding of human origins, rooted in the presence of African apes. At its heart, this theory suggests that our species first appeared in Africa around 300,000 years ago. Now, this idea wasn't new per se, but it did quickly become mainstream, with almost everyone agreeing to it.
Okay, now he's starting to sound like a real person again. But, how do I challenge this? It just didn't become mainstream with everyone agreeing to it for no reason. There's a couple of reasons. Scientists don't just start agreeing on nothing for no reason. Especially today in a modern era where people can't wait to prove people wrong.
Especially because it is supported by fossil evidence. A good example is the fact that the oldest remains of Homo sapiens were found in various parts of Africa, especially in places like Jebel Irhoud in Morocco. These fossils were quite important, as they gave us a look into the past and allowed us to understand what life as an early Homo sapien must have been like.
Yep, so I have to interject because I can't just play his entire video. But he's not getting to the point. He's just stating things that we already know. Sure, yes, this is what the Out of Africa theory believes. What is your attack on it?
From these fossils, we can tell that early humans would have faced many challenges, from hunting food to surviving in diverse environments.
Wow, that's very deep information. Apparently our ancestors, and we needed skulls to figure this out, they needed to hunt food and live in different environments. I already knew that information, and I don't need any skull to prove that. What do those skull? What's that knock on that skull's head? What is that about? Is that like a mace? If you're gonna show a skull and say that it does that, then we need proper information, not just throwaway lines.
But most importantly, we could tell that it's in this African landscape that they began to evolve and refine traits that distinguish us today. It was the cradle of life, the first home to complex thought, culture, and the beginning of technology. It, however, may also have been a lie all along.
Yeah, you will notice that this is the common thread between these videos, except the one I cut off, that it's always could be, should be, maybe, sort of, could have. Nothing is ever different. Why don't they just show the DNA evidence and go, see, human beings did not come out of Africa. Here's the genetics. It doesn't match. It doesn't make any sense.
See, it's not what happened in Africa that matters most, but what happened next that defines out of Africa theory. According to the theory, between 100,000 and 200,000 years ago, some of these early humans began to venture out of Africa. Contrary to what you would almost...
To be fair, the out of Africa people probably traveled about 70,000 years ago.
Immediately believe, this journey wasn't a single organized migration, but likely a series of movements driven by the changing climate, search for resources, and perhaps the innate curiosity that defines our species. As they spread into new territories in the Middle East, Asia, and eventually Europe, our ancient ancestors soon found out they were not alone.
Actually, according to new data, they found that out long time ago when they were still inside of Africa. Not only did they find that information out when they were still inside of Africa, but they wouldn't have been able to tell the difference because most of these people looked human for the most part. The idea that Neanderthals and all these other people looked so different from us that they looked like a completely different species was an assumption made because we thought that they never mated. But since they mated and stuff, there's a high chance that it just looked similar to us.
Soon encountered other hominins, our evolutionary relatives who had left Africa much earlier. For instance, Homo erectus and the Neanderthals had already established themselves across Eurasia centuries before early humans even began stepping away from home. So what happened to these evolutionary cousins? Well, the traditional out of Africa view held that Homo sapiens either replaced these archaic populations or outcompeted them, gradually leading to their extinction. This was the general belief that we spread from Africa like a wildfire and quickly outcompeted the rest and conquered the world. But recent evidence has now begun to complicate this picture, suggesting that instead of outright replacement, there was some degree of interbreeding. Genetic studies, for instance, show traces of Neanderthal DNA in modern non-African populations.
Okay, but you've already said that before. What is the point of the video? You've said, yes, human beings met other species and they mated with them. What's the point of the video?
Hinting that when these early modern humans encountered other hominins, they didn't always compete. They sometimes connected on a more intimate level, leaving a lasting genetic legacy. But here is the big question. Where have we gone wrong all along? Did humans actually come from Africa? And if not, where did they come from?
Human beings absolutely came from Africa. In order to debunk this, it's going to take a lot of information. There were some sloppy evolutionary biologists who started stating things randomly about us possibly being from Asia, but they've taken that back because it didn't make any sense. And I remember there was a 2007 study, I think, or 12 study, where they tried to say we evolved from Greece, I think, and now those people have taken that back as well.
Stay tuned to find out. At first glance, the out of Africa theory seems like a neatly wrapped gift, reliable and universally accepted, almost like the law of gravity. But when we dig a little deeper, we start to notice that some things don't line up quite as perfectly.
But you've already said that. You've already said, yes, we are going to debunk the idea that the out of Africa theory lines up with biology and history. Where's the proof? Why do you keep saying the same thing over and over again? It's getting frustrating.
Ironically, one of the biggest controversies surrounding the theory is also its biggest source of support. In a surprising twist, recent discoveries are revealing fossils that don't fully match the theory's predictions. This new evidence is prompting scientists to rethink and redefine what we thought we knew about our origins. So, what did they find? Discovered in 1966, but was not identified until 2022. The discovery of Ubaidiya vertebrae in Israel is perplexing, and one of the most fascinating discoveries that throws a wrench right into the out of Africa theory. Dating back about 1.5 million years, this vertebrae is the oldest evidence of ancient humans in Israel, and somehow it actually predates the well-known Homo erectus fossils found in Manisi, Georgia, which, by the way, are around 1.8 million years old.
By reading what is written here alone, you can see that there's no debunking of out of Africa, not in this statement. A 1.5 million year old vertebrate from an extinct human species unearthed in Israel suggests that ancient humans may have migrated from Africa in multiple waves, a new study finds. What does this have to do with not out of Africa theory? And then secondly, some of these people who left Africa early just died.
See, this is quite the big deal because up until now, the Manisi fossils were considered the earliest evidence of hominins outside of Africa. But with the discovery of Ubaidiya, this timeline had been shifted in a very fascinating way. This discovery's significance is not just because of its age, but also because of the size of the individual it belonged to. Let me explain. Analyses of the vertebrae reveal that even as a child, this individual would have been as tall as an adult Homo erectus from Manisi, with the potential to grow much larger as an adult. After hearing this, your first thought must be that scientists have discovered giants. But this size difference actually suggests something quite different. It points to the presence of two distinct types of early humans outside of Africa during this period.
Okay, but this is twisting of information. We know that there are other species which are not human, at least not as human as we are, who left Africa. But those people are not responsible for the human beings that we have today on Earth. That comes from directly Africa, and every single piece of evidence that you can find can easily be debunked, because if it wasn't, then the out of Africa theory would have been thrown away a long time ago.
This finding indicates that different hominin groups were exploring new regions simultaneously, rather than as part of a single unified migration.
Again, the out of Africa theory doesn't necessarily say that every other type of hominid came directly from the out of Africa 70,000 years ago movement that created human beings. So this would not even slightly contradict the information that has been known at least since, the 2000s.
A fossil wasn't the only thing fighting the out of Africa theory, because support for the idea of multiple migrations also came from comparing the tool technologies found at the two sites. In Manisi, the stone tools followed the expected older one tradition, which are simple flakes chipped off stones. But shockingly, the tools found in Ubaidiya are from the early Acheulean tradition, which are essentially more advanced tools, like hand axes made from volcanic rock. This contrast in tool styles makes no sense, because how does the older fossil have more complicated tools? And while we grapple with that, the tool difference points to cultural and technological differences between the two groups, essentially strengthening the case for separate migrations. Now,
well, first of all, there's so many answers to just the thing that you just said about, which let's just believe it at face value. The human beings have regressed in technology before, many times. So to say that things that came later were worse than things that came before, therefore the people before must have been more advanced as a species, does not make any sense.
You might say that one fossil alone shouldn't be enough to crumble the whole theory, and you'd be right, but here's the thing, it's not just one fossil. When you hear about a single fossil challenging a long-established theory, it's easy to dismiss it as a small anomaly that doesn't have much impact on the bigger picture, and in many cases, that would be a fair point. One lone fossil might not be enough to overturn decades of scientific understanding.
I love how he brings up a good point, but then he ruins it by saying it 3 times. One fossil does not ruin the whole theory. You might think that the thing might not ruin the whole theory. One fossil could not ruin the whole... It's like, you've said it already.
However, in this case, it's not just one fossil. The fossil in question is part of a much larger body of evidence, multiple fossils, genetic findings, and archaeological discoveries that together create a much more complex picture of human evolution than we once thought. And one of the other fossils that truly stands out is the Petrolona skull and the controversies that came with it. The Petrolona skull, discovered in a cave in Greece in 1959, sparked ongoing controversy due to debates over its age and its implications for human evolution.
See, I know what I'm talking about. This is that thing I was talking about where they discovered it in Greece, and the Greek scientists went around the world trying to proclaim that they had found a flaw in evolution, from the Chinese evolutionary biologists to the South African to the American to Canada to Australia. They all were thrown to the side and said to have nothing but full bias and had no real standing on what they said. Like I said, some of these people have gone back on what they were saying. Some of them even claim that they were misinterpreted, which is hilarious.
While the skull has been scientifically dated between 240,000 and 160,000 years old, aligning with the traditional out of Africa theory, Dr. Aris Poulianos, a prominent figure in the debate, has claimed that the skull is much older, about 700,000. If his dating is correct, it would significantly challenge the idea that modern humans first emerged in Africa and later migrated outwards.
Of course, if it was correct, that would happen. But if wishes were fishes, the world would be an ocean. What's your point? He's incorrect about most of the information that he states.
Poulianos also argued that the Petrolona skull represents the oldest human Europoid, suggesting that this fossil indicates a separate evolutionary lineage for Europe, distinct from Africa. He pointed to certain European-like traits in the skull's morphology to support his claim. However, his interpretation has not been widely accepted by the broader scientific community, which...
So the idea that a skull that has been dated to about 160,000 years ago is 700,000 years earlier than that, that is not accepted by scientists around the world. I am shocked. I, for one, am shocked.
Largely rejects the notion of a completely separate evolutionary path for Europe. The mainstream view, based on a combination of morphological analyses and reliable dating techniques, categorizes the Petrolona skull as belonging to Homo heidelbergensis. This species, thought to have lived in both Africa and Europe from about 700,000 to 200,000 years ago, is considered a common ancestor to both Neanderthals and modern humans.
So then we should cut the video over here, right? Like, if we know that these are the people who make it impossible for the Neanderthals to have a completely separate origin, or the Europeans, then this is where it ends? Or does he have other evidence to suggest that this is incorrect?
Studies comparing the Petrolona skull to other fossils, like the Cima de los Huesos skull from Spain and the Kabwe skull from Africa, show clear similarities. These similarities suggest that hominins from both continents likely belonged to a single ancestral group before diverging into Neanderthals in Europe and Homo sapiens in Africa.
Okay, 10 points for revealing information that contradicts the point of this video. So I will say that at least he's not fully biased, in that sense that he is showing the strongest points on the other side. Now, if you could show that to Robert Saper, that would be much appreciated.
Even if Poulianos' dating is incorrect, the Petrolona skull remains an important artifact in understanding the evolution of humans in Europe, and actually sets us up for a finding that pretty much throws the out of Africa theory out of the window. Now,
it throws the out of Africa theory out of the window. You just gave a good understanding of why it doesn't. What do you mean it throws the out of Africa theory out of the window?
While fossils are a big enough contributor to debunking the out of Africa theory, they were not the only ones working against it, because on a...
Okay, I think he's already confused himself in this one. No, there was no fossils that have shattered the out of Africa theory, and no, the molecular DNA data is not going to help either.
Molecular level, even genetics seems to be going against our trusted theory. In 2023, a groundbreaking study published in Nature challenged the traditional single-origin view of the out of Africa theory by proposing a new model of human evolution. This model proposes a network rather than a single evolutionary tree, and it's quite fascinating. See, the study used genetic data and computer models to analyze the genomes of 290 people from various parts of Africa, Southern, Eastern, and Western, testing multiple evolutionary scenarios to determine which best explain the diversity observed in modern humans. Surprisingly, the findings did not support the traditional single origin model, which had proposed that all modern humans descended from one unified population in Africa. Instead, the data revealed a more complex reality. Homo sapiens likely descended from at least two distinct groups within Africa. According to this plot twist, these groups were closely related but had maintained some degree of genetic separation over a long period. And to make things a bit crazier, they occasionally interbred, creating a dynamic mix of genes that defied the concept of a singular, homogeneous population as the origin of all humans.
Again, I don't even have to dispute what you're saying in order to find holes in what you're saying. I mean, you're literally saying that these two types had a common ancestor. You're literally saying that. So why? How can you sit there and say, therefore, they have two completely separate origins?
Now, this model was a big deal because up until now, we believed that we all came from the same population, a theory held up by mitochondrial Eve, the most recent woman from whom all living humans descended. So, what exactly did the researchers have to say about their model? Well, they described this model as resembling intertwining stems rather than a simple branching tree. In this view, early human populations periodically split and evolved separately, only to reconnect and share genetic material later. Essentially, there was a periodic early human reunion or meet and greet. Over hundreds of thousands of years, this process of intermittent separation and fusion soon contributed to the intricate genetic diversity seen in modern humans.
If he's referring to the same study that I have read before, then probably he's talking about the fact that there were other species of human beings in Africa which the human beings mated with. But through genetics and all of that, we can see that the majority of our DNA comes from a single line that is related to the Lucy skull and or the Lucy finding. And we can say to this day that most human beings come from a specific line. And of course, I think he's also mistaking the out of Africa theory with just Africa in general, because there are a lot of different skulls in Africa which give different dates for Africans and have been pushing back African people to dates way far back. I think Morocco has one of the oldest.
This means we aren't the outcome of one population's evolution, but the genetic offspring of different populations mixing and pushing for survival. Giving this branching theory some credit, archaeological evidence supported this model of interconnectedness rather than isolation. Artifacts from early human populations dating back between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago are spread across many regions of Africa. Now, here's the thought process today. If humans originated from one single source, shouldn't the oldest evidence be concentrated in just one location, with newer sites gradually spreading outward?
Well, firstly, that is what we see. We have like an oldest skull, and then we have old skulls that represent people traveling around the world. But also, no, of course, people are going to travel. Human beings are a traveling species, just like all the other people or types of humans that are related to us. They move. That's kind of what we do, and we've been doing it for a long, long time now. Like you pointed out, some human beings did leave earlier than the out of Africa theory, but again, they disappeared, and we can trace this through DNA, the fact that we all stem from a similar population as the out of Africa DNA, which I see nobody bring up. Bring up that DNA and tell me why it's incorrect.
Really, yes. But instead, what we're seeing is a mosaic. A complex patchwork of overlapping human populations across Africa, each contributing to the bigger story of how Homo sapiens came to be. So if out of Africa isn't the correct theory of how we got here, what is? Now, while it is still under scrutiny, the multi-regional hypothesis offers an interesting twist on how we think modern humans evolved, and it's a bit different from the more popular out of Africa theory. Instead of saying all modern humans came from one single population that left Africa, the multi-regional hypothesis suggests something more complex.
Okay, wait, so I'm going to try to guess here. So the out of Africa theory is simple and suggests that Africans came from Africa, right? And then they left and went around the world. While this complicated theory of yours, called the multi regional theory, which I'm going to guess means that humans came from multiple regions, sounds equally as simple when you state it like that, doesn't it? It would be complicated only when you look at the information, the detail. It is very strange that human beings did come from Africa and one specific location and all this type of stuff, but that's just the information that's there. What makes it complicated is that information.
It argues that Homo erectus, an earlier human ancestor, left Africa more than 1 million years ago and spread across Europe and Asia over time. The different groups of Homo erectus in these areas evolved into modern humans in their own regions. But here's the key. While these groups were evolving separately, they were still mixing and exchanging genes. This gene flow kept the populations connected, meaning human evolution wasn't happening in isolated bubbles, but more as a global, continued process.
Counterpoint, even though Homo erectus have left Africa, leaving Africa again, they did not contribute to the genetics of Homo sapiens later than the ones that they contributed inside of Africa, and they basically died, as we don't see any Homo erectus today, and there's no real significance to these people at all when we consider the out of Africa theory. And of course, this does not mean that there could never be any DNA in the future that could, that's going to show up. I mean, some people didn't think that we were mated with the Neanderthals, and there you go, there's the information. But again, in order to shatter the out of Africa theory, you're going to need way more evidence than just could it be and would it be and should it be.
The out of Africa theory suggests that Homo sapiens, us, originated in Africa and then spread out, completely replacing the populations already living in places like Asia and Europe.
Again, we're going to do this again. The out of Africa theory suggests that people moved out of Africa.
But supporters of the multi-regional hypothesis aren't convinced by this. They point out that we don't have solid evidence to show that there was a complete replacement. Instead, they argue Homo erectus populations in Asia were there for hundreds of thousands of years, and they likely played a role in the evolution of modern humans there. And one big reason they question the out of Africa model is that we don't see major changes in things like stone tools in Asia, even when Homo sapiens were supposedly arriving.
Again, a bold-faced lie, because obviously we know that people in Africa, when they left to Asia, there was a complete change of the stone technologies. Now, there is some proof that some human beings made it all the way to Asia prior to the out of Africa date, but again, as this says, DNA leaves little doubt. All non-Africans live today descend from a single wave of migration out of Africa, perhaps sometime between 50 to and 60,000 years ago. But over the years, scientists have found a handful of modern human sites that suggest our species may have wandered from its birthplace even earlier. A study published today in Nature Communications provides some of the strongest evidence yet of such an early dispersal thousands of kilometers from Africa inside a cave in Laos. Scientists have dated a pair of modern human bones to between 68,000 and 86,000 years ago. Although these precocious migrants likely didn't contribute much genetically to modern populations, they blazed the trail into Southeast Asia, followed by later generations. Now, one of the key things that you can tell about human beings being in an area is the sophistication of their stone tools. As we read, earlier hints of very ancient human presence in Southeast Asia and Australia include stone tools and charcoal from a shallow cave in northern Australia called that, dated to about 65,000 years ago by optically stimulated luminescence. That method estimates how long it's been since bits of sediment were last exposed to light and gives a reliable date only if the sediment around an artifact is undisturbed. Some scientists argue that burrowing termites may have shuffled that ground and question its date. In 2017, Sumatra Leda Aja Cave yielded teeth identified as Homo sapiens and dated to between 70,000 and 46,000 years ago. Scientists have also identified stone tools in central India as human-made and date them to about 74,000 years ago. But in each case, these cases, other researchers have questioned the evidence. So basically, even if some Africans left Africa earlier and any other date, it doesn't mean anything, because you have to go against the DNA and show why are the DNA markers in Africa that show that people come from Africa and the diversity in Africa is bigger and all this other stuff. Why is that incorrect? Without addressing that, the out of Africa theory will stay completely intact. Do I believe there's some way that it could be shattered? Perhaps, but you're going to need way more evidence than this. Ancient humans traveled halfway to the world before migration out of Africa. Now remember, a lot of this is disputed, and one thing that they found in one of them was that there was no stone tools, which one of the scientists said is thought because they didn't even use stone tools, they were using bamboo, which is freely available in Asia. Again, this would be a change in technology.
Homo sapiens had replaced the local populations, you would expect to see some noticeable shifts in culture or technology, but that didn't happen. Instead,
actually, it did happen. It happens over and over again. It's going to continue to happen. This happens. Yes, it happened today in Asia because we're Homo sapiens and they came out of Africa and they're part of us. Their technology is still superior to that of the Homo erectus and all these other groups that died out. Just, accept that Africans are sort of your home. Come home.
Things just seem to have continued on as before, suggesting that those earlier populations didn't just vanish, but contributed to the evolution of modern humans. There's also some evidence that supports the multi-regional hypothesis, even if it's not always directly related. For example, the vertebra at Ubaidiya, which we spoke of earlier, fits with the idea that human evolution was a lot messier and more interconnected than the out of Africa theory would have us believe. Instead of a single wave of migration, the multi-regional hypothesis paints a picture of multiple migrations and gene mixing across different regions, leading to the modern humans we know today. Even though the multi-regional hypothesis is still considered a minority view in science, with the out of Africa theory being the dominant one, it still raises some important points.
Instead of putting this filler time where you keep saying the same thing over and over again, the multi-version disputes the one-wave version, the multi-version disputes, why don't you just show the evidence instead of claiming it over and over again?
It challenges us to think beyond the idea that human evolution was just a series of isolated events. Instead, it suggests that the process was more complex and that different populations, even though they were spread out across the globe, were still connected by gene flow. The idea isn't just about migration, it's about how those migrations, along with mixing between groups, helped shape the human species over time. So while out of Africa gets most of the attention, the multi-regional hypothesis opens up a more complicated and interconnected story of how we became who we are. But why do we even need the theories in the first place? And why do we need to look further than just recent history? When we think about human evolution,
if this video was honest, he would say, when we think about human evolution, we like to make information up and then start to claim that people who have studied this for years are making the information up, and we use biased and hand-picked information by already discredited researchers in order to try and poke holes in something that is virtually cemented. That's what he would say. But instead, what he's going to say is something completely different that has nothing to do with reality.
It's easy to focus just on the past 100,000 years, especially since that's the period most often linked to the out of Africa theory. But if we only look at this short span of time,
Who says this is the only time that scientists and researchers look at? It's not the only time. It's not the only time they look at. They've looked at other times. Evidence when it comes, and like the Neanderthal evidence, when it shatters what we previously believed, they just go with it. That idea, I remember hearing it for the first time, and I remember realizing that there's going to be some people who have a political problem and think that there's going to be some kind of backlash. Black people didn't have a backlash against the Neanderthal DNA thing. You know why? Because why would we? Real there's nothing there. It's just evidence. There's no real attack.
Risk missing out on some of the most important events that shaped who we are today. Our evolutionary story didn't start 100,000 years ago. It stretches far, far beyond that, and the earlier stages are key to understanding our unique traits and abilities. Basically, a serious effect of ignoring hominid evolutionary processes beyond 100,000 years ago is the loss of input data to research.
Something that you might not have realized is that he's mixing things here up. Human evolution doesn't start 100,000 years ago, at least not in Africa. The 100,000 years has to do with leaving Africa. I don't know why he's mistaking leaving Africa with evolving. Human beings have been evolving in Africa for more than that, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. So you can see here that he's showing his ignorance a little bit by saying that people are just looking at the last 100,000 years.
For example, by ignoring earlier developments, we miss out on understanding the significance of bipedalism, our ability to walk on two legs, a major milestone that happened long before 100,000 years ago. Bipedalism is one of the defining features that separates us from other primates, and it played a huge role in our evolution. This shift to walking upright didn't just change the way we moved, it opened up a world of possibilities. For starters, walking on two legs freed up our...
Yep, and of course, no scientist, no researcher, no evolutionary biologist, nobody has ever thought that looking at bipedalism might be a good idea, right? Because they just looked at the last 100,000 years and they were like, yeah, that's all I want to research. I don't want to see if there's other species that we descend from. I don't want to see if there's any species outside of Africa. They just all look inside Africa at 100,000 years and then stop there, right?
hands for other tasks like using tools and carrying things. This change had a huge impact on the structure of our bodies, from the shape of our hands to how our pelvis and spine evolved to support upright walking. These physical changes were important, but they also set the stage for changes in our behaviour. Standing upright gave us better visibility of our surroundings, which helped us watch out for danger or to track animals.
Since we're just throwing out random information out there, yes, the reason why your information is correct about us being pretty good at what we do, like wolves, we operate as a group and we have many other great traits outside of just standing and having fingers, which is why we would defeat one gorilla if there was 100 of us.
It also made it easier for travelling long distances, which likely played a role in our social behaviour and even in the development of strategies like cooperative hunting. When we ignore the earlier stages of evolution, it's like reading a book and only starting with the last chapter. Sure, the final chapter might have the big revelation, but you wouldn't fully understand it without knowing the backstory.
You know what's funny? If we use this analogy that some people are reading the final chapter of the book and then claiming they've read the book, first of all, that's not what happened with them. But the way he's presented his information, it's like he basically tore 3 or 4 pages out of the book and then is claiming that the entire book is about something completely different than the people who have looked at the entire book.
The same goes for human evolution. To truly understand how we got where we are today, we need to look at the long and complex history that preceded us. One of the first steps in this story is bipedalism, which set the foundation for so many other developments in our evolution.
For some of you that think that I'm actually just being weird, let me just ask you a question. Isn't the point of this video the fact that the out of Africa theory is incorrect? What does bipedalism have to do with anything? All he did was just go find another thing that has to do with the development of humans and just throw it in the video.
It's important to remember that evolution isn't a simple, linear process that happens in neat little timeframes. Evolution is ongoing and interconnected, with each stage building on the last. For example, bipedalism didn't just show up and stay the same for millions of years. It evolved and adapted alongside other changes like the development of tools, brain growth, and environmental pressures. All of these factors worked together over millions of years to shape the human species we are today. So when we look at human evolution, it's essential to think in terms of deep time. This means recognizing that our evolutionary journey spans millions of years, with each chapter influencing the next.
Okay, so I'll just say that maybe this is just his final remarks and this is why he's talking like this. But I don't know why he says our species and all this other stuff when he suggested that the human species is not one species. Don't you mean our pocket of species that is separate than so many other species of human? And also, what is the conclusion of this video? I haven't seen his wrap up about what does that therefore mean for the modern population.
Only by considering the full picture, from the earliest stages of bipedalism all the way to the rise of Homo sapiens, can we fully appreciate how we came to be and our place in the grand story of life on Earth. But what do you think? Do you stand by the Out of Africa theory, or do you believe that there's more to the story? Let us know in the comments section below, and while you're at it, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons to explore even more wonders of prehistoric times.
Yeah, everything you said doesn't make sense. Everything you said doesn't follow, and I can understand that this is just a video, so I'm just gonna leave it alone at, yep, I don't agree with everything that was said, and no, the scientists are not biased or throwing information around. Now, I will say again, this guy didn't come with any race things, so I don't want to throw that on him. The other two definitely did. I'm not even gonna bother with Robert Saper. That guy doesn't even. Yeah, the grandfather dude. I try to ignore everything he says, but it always ends up somewhere in my recommended, and that's why I have to react to it. This has been a very long video. I apologize if you didn't get to this point. If you did, think about liking, sharing, subscribing, and doing other things that could benefit us all. Thank you.